Before you hear this story, remember one thing. Not every monster lives in the dark. Some live in houses that look normal. Some wear the face of trust. Some are called Father. This is not a story meant to entertain you. This is a story meant to wake you up. Because the most dangerous crimes are not the loud ones. They are the ones hidden behind closed doors, protected by silence, and ignored by society. If a child becomes quiet, if fear replaces laughter, if a home feels wrong but looks right, do not look away. This story will make you uncomfortable. It will challenge what you believe about safety, family, and trust. But if even one child is saved because someone listened till the end, then this story has done its job. Listen carefully, because what you are about to hear is not just a story, it is a warning. Jason belonged to a simple middle-class family. He was not rich, not powerful, not famous, just another man trying to survive between bills, responsibilities, and routine. He worked a government job that paid just enough to keep the lights on and food on the table. His life changed when he met Jacqueline. Jacqueline was warmth in human form. She laughed easily, trusted deeply, and believed that love could fix anything. Their marriage was not arranged by families or traditions, it was chosen by hearts. They rented a small house in a narrow street, where neighbors knew each other by first names and children played cricket until sunset. When their daughter Jessica was born, Jason cried for the first time in years. He held the tiny child in his arms and promised silently that no harm would ever reach her. Jacqueline named her Jessica because she liked how the name sounded strong and gentle at the same time. For 5 years, the house felt alive. Morning tea, school bags, bedtime stories, and laughter filled every corner. But happiness does not always ask permission before leaving. Jacqueline fell ill suddenly. What started as weakness turned into hospital visits, then long nights of fear. One winter morning, Jason returned from the hospital alone. Jessica waited by the door, asking the same question again and again. Jason could not answer. Jacqueline was gone. The house changed after that day. Curtains stayed closed. Meals became silent. Jason tried to be both father and mother, but grief hollowed him from the inside. Jessica stopped asking where her mother was. Children understand loss before they understand words. As years passed, Jason grew distant. He still worked, still paid bills, still appeared normal to the world outside, but inside the house, something dark was growing. The kind of darkness that hides behind locked doors and polite smiles. When Jessica turned 12, she was no longer a little child. She was quiet, careful, and afraid of making mistakes she didn't understand. Her teachers noticed she stopped participating. Neighbors noticed she rarely came outside. Jason said she was sick or studying. People believed him. Society often trusts parents without question. The house became a place of fear for Jessica, not because of monsters under the bed, but because of footsteps in the hallway. Not because of darkness, but because of silence. She learned to stay still, to speak less, to disappear within herself. Childhood faded without ceremony. No one heard her cries because she stopped making them. No one saw her pain because she learned to hide it. This is how evil survives, not loudly but quietly. Years passed in this suffocating routine. Jason kept the doors locked, the windows covered, and the truth buried. To the outside world, he was a widower raising a daughter alone. Sympathy protected him better than any lie. One afternoon, while Jason was at work, children from the street were playing cricket. Their laughter echoed against the walls that had heard none for years. The ball flew high and landed inside Jason's house. The gate was locked from outside. The children argued for a moment, then one of them climbed the wall just to retrieve the ball. It was supposed to be simple. Inside, the house felt wrong, too quiet, too heavy. As the boy moved toward the back, he noticed a window slightly open. From inside came a sound he did not understand at first, a weak voice, trembling, asking for help. He looked through the window and froze. What he saw was not something a child should ever see. A girl bound by fear, not just ropes, eyes filled with years of pain, a face that looked older than its age. The boy dropped the ball and ran. That evening he told his mother everything. His voice shook. His hands wouldn't stop trembling. His mother listened, her face turning pale with every word. When his father returned home, they told him too. Adults often hesitate. They fear being wrong more than they fear being late. But this time fear turned into determination. The neighbors began to watch the house closely. Days passed. Jason returned from work, locked the door, and the silence continued. But the street was no longer blind. One evening, Jason came home tired and distracted. He forgot to lock the door from inside. That was the mistake that ended years of darkness. The neighbors entered together, not as heroes, but as humans who refused to look away anymore. What they found confirmed their worst fears. The girl was rescued, shaking, barely able to stand, but alive. Police sirens broke the silence of the street for the first time. Jason was taken away in handcuffs. No explanations, no excuses, just consequences. Jessica stepped outside the house she had been trapped in for years. The sky looked unfamiliar. Freedom often does. Her story did not end there. Healing never begins immediately. But that night, for the first time in years, she slept without fear, and the street learned a lesson it would never forget. Evil does not always look evil. Sometimes it looks like a father, the night after Jessica was taken out of that house, did not feel like freedom. It felt like confusion. Police lights flashed, neighbors whispered, and strangers wrapped shawls around her shoulders, but none of it reached her properly. Trauma does that. It builds walls inside the mind stronger than any lock. At the police station, questions were asked gently at first, then carefully. Jessica sat quietly, staring at the floor. Her hands trembled when someone offered her water. She flinched at sudden movements. The officers understood something terrible had happened, even without words. Pain often speaks through silence. Jason sat in another room, staring straight ahead, his face empty. The man who once promised protection had become the danger. There were no dramatic confessions, no tears of regret, only denial and coldness. Monsters rarely look like monsters when caught. They look ordinary. Jessica was moved to a shelter that night, a clean bed, a soft blanket, a room without locks. Yet she could not sleep. Every sound felt like a threat. Every shadow reminded her of years she could not erase. Safety felt unfamiliar, almost frightening. Days turned into weeks. Social workers tried to help her speak, but words came slowly. Some wounds are too deep to rush. A counselor sat with her every day, not forcing questions, just listening. Healing began not with answers, but with patience. Medical reports were filed, evidence was collected. The truth, hidden for years, was now written on paper. The case shook the neighborhood. People asked themselves painful questions. How did we not see this? Why didn't we act sooner? Silence became a shared guilt. At school, teachers spoke about child safety. Parents held their children tighter. But awareness often comes after damage is done. Jessica became a name people whispered about, forgetting she was a person, not a story. Court proceedings began months later. Jessica was older now, but still fragile. She was not forced to face Jason directly. The system protected her where society had failed. Every statement was handled carefully. Every detail mattered, not to shock, but to bring justice. Jason was convicted, not because of anger, not because of revenge, but because facts do not lie. The sentence was long. The door closed behind him for the last time, but the damage he caused did not disappear with that sound. Jessica was placed with a foster family, a woman who spoke softly, a man who never raised his voice. At first, she did not trust kindness. She waited for it to turn into something else. It took months before she believed that care could exist without fear. She learned to sleep with the lights off again. She learned that locked doors could mean safety, not danger. She learned that her past did not define her future, even if it would always be part of her. Years later, Jessica stood in front of a room full of people. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. She told her story, not in detail, not for sympathy, but for warning. Evil hides, she said. It hides in families, in respect, in silence. If you ignore signs, you become part of it. The room was silent. Her words reached places her screams never could, and somewhere a child listening understood that they were not alone. Time moved forward, but it did not erase what had happened. It only created distance. Jessica learned that survival and healing were not the same thing. She could breathe now, walk freely, laugh sometimes, but the past followed her like a shadow that lengthened in quiet moments. Nightmares came without warning. In dreams, rooms shrank, doors disappeared, and her voice refused to come out. She would wake up shaking, her heart racing, unsure where she was. Her foster mother would sit beside her bed, not asking questions, just staying there until the fear passed. Slowly, Jessica learned that comfort did not always demand explanations. Trust was the hardest thing to rebuild. When someone raised their voice, even in excitement, her body reacted before her mind could. Crowded places overwhelmed her. She avoided mirrors for a long time because she did not recognize the girl looking back. Trauma had changed her posture, her eyes, her silence. Therapy became part of a routine, not because she was broken, but because she deserved support. She learned words for feelings she had carried without names: fear, shame, anger, confusion. The counselor reminded her again and again that none of it was her fault. That sentence took years to fully sink in. Meanwhile, the street where she once lived changed too. Parents watched more closely, neighbors spoke more openly. What had happened became a warning passed quietly from house to house. Some people felt guilt for not noticing earlier. Others felt anger, at Jason, at themselves, at a system that often waits too long. Jason's name faded from public conversation, but his actions did not. The damage extended beyond one life. It spread through families, through trust, through the illusion that this doesn't happen here. As Jessica grew older, she struggled with a question that haunted many survivors. Who am I beyond what happened to me? She discovered strength in small things, finishing school assignments, helping younger children at the shelter, learning to say no without fear. Every boundary she set was a quiet victory. There were setbacks, days when the world felt heavy again. Days when memories returned without invitation. Healing was not a straight line, it was a slow, uneven path. But she kept walking. One afternoon, she volunteered at a community center. A little girl clung to her hand, scared of being alone. Jessica knelt down and smiled gently, promising she wasn't going anywhere. In that moment, something shifted. She realized that survival had given her empathy, and empathy could become purpose. She began studying social work. Not because she wanted to relive the past, but because she wanted to protect futures. She learned how abuse hides behind respect, how silence protects wrongdoers, and how awareness saves lives. When she spoke publicly again, she didn't talk about pain alone. She talked about signs: withdrawal, fear, sudden changes. She talked about believing children even when the truth is uncomfortable. She talked about courage, not the loud kind, but the kind that listens, acts, and refuses to ignore. People cried during her talks. Some came forward with their own stories afterward. Jessica listened. She believed them. She understood. She could not change what happened to her, but she could change what happened next. to someone else. And slowly, the story that once defined her became the reason she saved others. As Jessica's voice began to reach more people, she realized something painful but important. Her story was not rare. Everywhere she spoke, someone stayed behind after the crowd left, a mother, a teacher, a grown man with tears in his eyes. Each carried a secret they had buried for years, believing silence was safer than truth. Society often teaches children to obey without question and adults to mind their own business. That combination creates perfect hiding places for cruelty. Jessica understood now that what happened to her was not only one man's crime, it was also the result of ignored signs and misplaced trust. She remembered how neighbors had once believed Jason without doubt, how respectability had acted like a shield. He had a job, he was a father, he looked normal. No one wanted to imagine that danger could live so close, behind familiar walls. Jessica began working with schools and community groups. She spoke about small changes that mean everything. A child who suddenly becomes silent, fear of going home, unexplained anxiety, isolation. She reminded adults that children rarely lie about pain, but they often hide it out of fear. Some people resisted her message. "This will destroy families," they said. "This will create mistrust." Others argued. Jessica answered calmly, "Silence destroys families. Truth gives them a chance." She learned that courage is not just speaking up. It is listening when someone does. Many people hear warning signs and choose comfort instead of action. They tell themselves it's none of their business. They wait for proof. By the time proof arrives, damage has already been done. The community where Jessica once lived slowly transformed. People began checking on one another. Children were encouraged to speak freely. Teachers were trained to recognize distress. It did not erase the past, but it honored it by refusing to repeat it. Still, there were days when the weight of responsibility felt heavy. Carrying awareness meant carrying other people's pain too. Jessica sometimes wondered if she would ever be just a person again, not a symbol, not a survivor, not a warning. On those days, she reminded herself why she started. She remembered the locked rooms, the silence, the moment when a child's courage broke the cycle. She remembered that one act of attention can save a life. Jessica also learned to forgive, not Jason, not the crime, but herself. For surviving, for speaking late, for taking time to heal. Forgiveness, she learned, was not forgetting. It was choosing not to let the past decide her worth. Years later, laws changed in small but meaningful ways. Reporting systems improved. Awareness campaigns spread. Jessica knew progress was slow, but slow did not mean meaningless. Every protected child mattered. She stood once more before a room full of people and said quietly, "If something feels wrong, it probably is. If a child seems afraid, listen. If silence feels heavy, break it." No one applauded immediately. They didn't need to. The message had already settled where it mattered. And somewhere, behind a closed door, someone chose to speak instead of stay silent. Justice did not arrive like a celebration. It arrived quietly through files, signatures, hearings, and long waits. Jessica learned that accountability is often slow, but its weight is real. Every legal step taken against Jason was not just about punishment. It was about recognition. Recognition that what happened mattered. That her pain was real. The trial ended, but its echo stayed. Jason's name disappeared from daily talk, yet his actions lived on as a reminder of what unchecked power and silence can create. Jessica never looked for closure in his punishment. Closure, she learned, does not come from another person's downfall. It comes from reclaiming your own life. She focused on building something new. Education became her anchor. Learning gave her control, something that had once been taken from her. She studied hard not to escape the past, but to understand it, how cycles of abuse form, how authority can be misused, how society often protects the wrong people. Jessica started working with local authorities and child protection teams. She helped design awareness sessions that didn't rely on fear, but on clarity. She emphasized that predators do not always look threatening. They often look trusted, familiar, ordinary. Her work reached families who had never talked about such things before. Parents learned to ask questions. Children learned they could say no. Schools created safe reporting spaces. Small systems changed one by one. There were moments of doubt, times when Jessica felt overwhelmed by stories that mirrored her own. She learned to step back when needed to protect her own mental health. Strength, she discovered, also means knowing when to rest. One day, she received a letter from a woman who said Jessica's words had saved her daughter. The letter was short, but it stayed with her for years. In that moment, Jessica understood that even if the world never fully heals, individual lives can. She stopped seeing herself only as someone who survived something terrible. She began seeing herself as someone who transformed pain into purpose. The difference mattered. Justice, she realized, is not only about courts and sentences. It is about years past, and life slowly found a new rhythm. Not an easy one, not a perfect one, but a real one. Jessica learned that healing does not mean erasing scars. It means learning how to live without letting them control every step. Some days were light, others heavy, but she no longer walked alone. She built a life grounded in honesty. She chose friendships carefully, trusted slowly, and spoke openly about boundaries. What once felt fragile inside her had turned into something steady. Strength, she realized, was not loud. It was consistent. Jessica continued her work quietly. She didn't chase attention or headlines. She focused on places where voices were still unheard, small towns, overlooked schools, families afraid to speak. She reminded people that danger does not announce itself. It blends in. It hides behind routine, authority, and silence. She often said one sentence that stayed with those who heard it. Pay attention to what feels wrong, not just what looks right. Parents began having conversations they once avoided. Teachers learned to listen beyond words. Neighbors stopped dismissing unease as imagination. These were not dramatic changes, but they mattered. Prevention rarely makes noise, but it saves lives. Jessica never called herself a hero. She knew how easily things could have gone differently. Her freedom had begun with a child who noticed something was wrong, and adults who chose to act. That truth kept her grounded. Change, she believed, is always collective. Sometimes, late at night, memories still surfaced. She let them come and go without fighting. They no longer owned her. She had learned that acknowledging pain does not give it power. It takes power away. On one occasion, a young girl asked her, "Does it ever stop hurting?" Jessica paused before answering. "It stops controlling you," she said, "and that's enough to live fully." Her story became part of training manuals, awareness campaigns, and quiet conversations at dinner tables. Not because it was shocking, but because it was real, because it reminded people that protecting children